All right, hey y'all, it's Miss Summers with your notes today. We're continuing our discussion on the biosphere. So on Monday we talked about biomes, basically the different types of habitats that plants and animals and living things can live in. And then on Tuesday we talked about biodiversity and the importance of maintaining biodiversity, making sure that you have lots of different kinds of living things. And then yesterday we talked about the importance of food chains and food webs because they show us how living things obtain energy. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted to do. How living things obtain energy. So today we're looking at living things. We're continuing looking at living things. We're going to look at this thing called limiting factors and what they are and why they're important and how people influence them. So let's begin. Before we talk about limiting factors, we have to know the levels of ecological organization. So the smallest unit of ecology is the humble organism down here. Just one little thingy. Okay, so you are an organism. I am an organism. Yeah, just one thing. All right. A group of the same thingies, a group of organisms that are the same species, are a population. So in this classroom, we have a population of students. We have a population of students at our school or in our state or in our country, whatever. Depends on how big of an area you want to look at. All right, but you're all the same thing. A community are several populations put together. So in this case, we have like the groundhogs and whatever this little weird thingy is. I guess it's a bird of some variety, and the buffalo in the background. All right, so communities, several populations intermingling with one another. All right, and the larger ones, an ecosystem. You see, the only thing different here, we have all our communities, all of our living thingies, plus the non-living aspect of the environment, so the abiotic factors. And then multiple ecosystems make up the entire biosphere, which is all of Earth. All right, so let's look at populations specifically. So this is a little infographic that I pulled from like the ASPCA or something like that. Talking about kitty cats, all right? And how a lady kitty cat, a female kitty cat, when she is sexually mature, she can have up to 3 litters per year, and on average, she'll give birth to 4 to 6 kittens at a time. So if you do the math up, that can be anywhere up to between 12 and 18 kittens a year. So one kitten or one cat over the course of her lifetime, and assuming that some of her kittens also live to be adults, can produce more than 400,000 more cats within their lifetime between her and her immediate offspring, which is a lot of cats. Like, that's a lot. Even for somebody like me who loves cats with all their heart, like, that's too many, right? So, do these populations, will they grow forever? And the answer to that, hopefully, we don't obviously have millions and billions of cats running around, unfortunately, is no. So, and this is cut off here, but it's on your notes. So what stops that? What keeps populations under control? And it's this thing, this magical line here called the carrying capacity. And we've talked about carrying capacity with humans and our population. A carrying capacity is a limit on how many individuals the environment can support. So it's a set limit. It's based on a bunch of different factors. Now, the interesting thing about humans, if you remember from when we talked about human populations, we're not 10,000% sure what the carrying capacity is for humans because humans have this really cool ability to change how many resources the environment can give us, basically, because we have all this really cool, fun technology and tools, and we've used our brains in that way. So that's why the human population has gotten so large, because we haven't gotten to our carrying capacity yet, but we're getting close, probably. All right, so what determines that carrying capacity, Ms. Summers? Well, that's a good question. Limiting factors. A limiting factors limits your population size. Easy enough. All right, so it puts a limit on there. Now, there's 2 different flavors of limiting factors, and I need you to be able to tell the difference. So our first one are the density-dependent factors. So the density, remember from physical science or from any other science, I guess, density is basically a measure of how much stuff you have in a given area. So a density dependent factors affects populations more so when you have a high population density. That is, you have more individuals in a small area. So I found this snazzy little infographic. It represents the densities of 4 major U.S. cities. You can see New York is the most dense. There is the most amount of people in a little tiny area. In Houston, they're all more spread out. So a density dependent factor will affect our friends here more than they will say here. So let's look at 2 examples. So our first one, disease. So like influenza, bacteria causing diseases, stuff like that. If your population is more dense, that is, there are more people in an area or more things in an area, diseases tend to spread more quickly and more individuals are affected and subsequently die. So in an outbreak, you would ideally not be in New York because if this person's sick, they can easily pass it to this person and then to that person, and then everybody's sick all of a sudden. Whereas if you're in, say, Houston, which is not nearly as dense, this person might be sick, but they might not make everyone else sick because they're all able to spread out. So that's a good example of why disease is density dependent. Another one, another density dependent factor, competition between species. So competition is when 2 animals have to fight for a single resource like food or space. So the example I chose here, I picked lions and hyenas. They both live in the same ecosystem and they compete for food resources. Oftentimes, lionesses, they will kill something. They'll do the heavy work essentially. They'll bring down like a water buffalo or a zebra or whatever. And then the hyenas come in and they try to snag it from it. They try to steal it because that's what they do. So, if there are a large number of hyenas or a large number of lions, chances are they're going to intermingle more and meet more, and that competition will increase. And that's why competition tends to be density dependent. If there's not as many, they tend to spread out. There's not as much need to compete for stuff if everyone's spread out and there's not a whole lot. So, density dependent factors tend to be biotic. And remember, biotic means that they are living things. So competition, those are between living things. Diseases tend to either be caused by living things like bacteria or funguses or protists, and they're spread among living organisms. Right? So if density dependent is our first factor, our next factor, quite logically, is density independent. So when you're independent of something, it doesn't affect you. So density independent factors are not affected by density. They affect population the same way regardless of the size, regardless of the density. So a really small spread out population will be affected the exact same way that a very large dense population is. So let's look at 2 examples. First one, a forest fire or other natural disasters. So here we have a forest fire of some variety, probably in California. Imagine that there are bunny rabbits in this forest. A fire does not care if there's 5 rabbits or 500. It's going to kill them all the same. It doesn't matter that there's only one of you or if there's 1,000. Our second example of a density independent factor, temperature changes. So thinking about fishies in a river, we remember from water quality that fish are very picky about their temperature. And if the temperature gets too high because people cut down trees and the shade went away, or they're dumping hot water in from like a nuclear plant, or maybe global warming, the temperature's getting hotter at the surface. If this temperature gets too high, each fish dies. There could be 1 fish, there could be 1 million fish. It really doesn't matter. because each organism responds the same way. Density-independent factors tend to be abiotic, so they are not alive. So a forest fire and temperature, those are non-living aspects of the ecosystem. So let's do a little review, a little comprehension check, shall we? So you have 5 thingies here. I want you to determine whether each of them are density dependent or independent. So think about this, look at it, and say, does it matter how many individuals are there? If it does, it's dependent. If it doesn't, it's independent. Take a moment to do this, and when you pause the video and when you're ready, you can come back. Okay, you're back. So let's check your answers to these 5. Hey, there you go. All right, so a flash flood would be independent because a flood is abiotic, first off, and it doesn't matter how many you have. The entire population gets affected the same way. Predation and availability of food are both dependent. Both of these are biotic factors because predators are alive and food also is alive. If there's more of a population, the availability of food goes down, so the population changes in response. Same with predation. If there's not a whole lot of predators, populations can increase quickly. But if a lot of predators are introduced and there's a whole bunch of organisms and they're all in a close area, predators can pick them off more easily. A tsunami, this one should have been pretty straightforward. It's abiotic, and if a wave comes and crashes into the shore, it doesn't matter how many organisms are there, everybody gets affected the same way. Urbanization was one that I think it may or may not have thrown you off, because urbanization is caused by people, and people are biotic, but it doesn't matter how many individuals there are. Urbanization will affect them all the same. All right, so urbanization is going to cause things like soil erosion, which is going to create that excess runoff and turbidity, so that's all abiotic. Let's imagine an area is urbanized, so you had a forest or whatever, and then deforestation occurred. You took out all that habitat. It doesn't matter how many organisms live there. If there were a whole bunch or just a few that were spread out, nobody's going to have their habitat. All right. So if you need to go back and catch something, please feel free to do that. If not, you can move on to your assignment. So you should have a sheet in front of you that has a bunch of reading on one side, and then on the other side there's a space for you to answer some questions about the reading. So you can use your notes in that. It's all linked on the website if you want to get a read-aloud version of it. And afterwards, there is a link on the class website for some video assignments with this material as well. If you have any questions, drop a comment or come ask me at the front. Either way is fine. I'll see you later.